Why did everyone laugh when she pulled it out? The wind howled across the ridge, carrying the sound of distant artillery like thunder trapped inside the earth. Smoke drifted low, heavy enough to coat the back of the throat. Mud clung to everything: boots, sleeves, thoughts. She lay pressed against the ground, heart steady, breath slow, holding something no one else on the team took seriously. A mirror. Small, cracked, scratched beyond repair, at least by anyone who believed tools had to look dangerous to be useful. Behind her someone snorted, a laugh cut through the chaos, sharp and careless. "That thing won't save you," a voice said. "Not out here." She didn't answer, she never did. Lena Ward had learned early that explanations invited doubt, and doubt wasted time. Time was the one thing the battlefield never forgave. She kept her eyes forward, fingers steady, angling the mirror just enough to catch the slope above them. And in that reflection, death was already moving. Before the first shot echoed, before anyone realized what was happening, the enemy advance collapsed in silence. One body dropped, then another, then another. No muzzle flash, no warning, just confusion spreading like rot through a disciplined formation. When it was over, when the ground finally stopped shaking, every eye turned toward her. Toward the mirror they had mocked, and the woman they had never truly seen. That morning at the forward operating base had begun the same way most mornings did for her: cold, quiet, and lonely in a way that had nothing to do with physical distance. Lena sat apart from the others, perched on an ammunition crate, cleaning the mirror with the same care she gave her rifle. Around her, soldiers joked, argued, complained about rations and command decisions. No one spoke to her. She was used to that too. At 5'3", slight to the point of looking fragile in gear designed for larger frames, she had been underestimated since the first day of training. Too small, too quiet, too strange. The jokes had never stopped. Make-up jokes, doll jokes, questions about why someone like her would choose this life. She let them talk. The mirror caught the firelight as she turned it, the cracks splitting the reflection into fractured angles. To them it looked broken. To her, it looked complete. "Still playing dress-up," someone called, laughter followed. She didn't look up. What none of them knew, what she had learned long before the uniform, before the rifle, was that seeing straight ahead was the fastest way to miss everything that mattered. Her father had taught her that. He had been a mountain guide once, long before the war took everything else. He taught her how animals moved, how people moved, how fear bent behavior into patterns. He taught her that light didn't travel the way we thought it did, and that the safest way to watch something dangerous was never head-on. "Nature has corners," he used to say. "Learn to look around them." She had carried that lesson into every part of her life, especially this one. When the briefing came, the room was thick with tension. Supplies were cut. Enemy forces were closing in. The map on the hood of the Humvee looked like a trap tightening its grip. Elevated positions, choke points, lines converging on their valley. Someone had to go see what was forming on the eastern ridge. When her name was called, there was a pause, the kind that comes before someone says what they really think. She accepted the assignment without hesitation, a nod, nothing more. She heard the whispers as she walked away, heard the bets being placed, heard the quiet certainty that she wouldn't come back. She didn't correct them. The approach took hours, frozen ground, exposed terrain, every movement deliberate. Her spotter struggled to match her pace, breathing loud in the thin air. She moved like water, distributing weight, reading the ground before trusting it. By the time they reached the observation point, the sun was already sinking. What she saw through her optic made her blood go cold. It wasn't just an enemy presence. It was preparation, heavy weapons, artillery, enough force to erase their position entirely. They had been right to worry. They had been wrong to underestimate her. The ambush came fast, too fast. A grenade tore the silence apart. Gunfire erupted from angles she hadn't anticipated. Their radio went dead. Her spotter went down, blood soaking into the frozen earth. They were cut off, trapped between an advancing enemy force and a valley already under assault. She felt fear then, real fear, sharp and immediate, the kind that demands a choice. Run and survive alone, or stay and become something else entirely. She chose to stay. She dragged her wounded teammate into cover, hands moving on instinct, sealing the bleeding, ignoring the fire tearing through branches above them. Her mind was already shifting, already mapping the terrain in ways no map ever could. She pulled out the mirror. Her spotter laughed, hysterical, broken. "That's your plan." She didn't look at him. "No," she said quietly, "this is how I see." She angled the mirror just enough. And the hunt began. She never raised her head, never exposed herself. Every enemy movement appeared first as a reflection, fragmented and distorted to anyone else. To her it was clarity, distances calculated, angles reversed, wind accounted for. The first shot dropped a soldier who never knew he'd been seen. Then another. Confusion spread. Return fire came from the wrong directions. Suppression aimed at ghosts. She relocated, fired again, relocated again. The mirror turned the ground itself into a weapon. By the time silence settled, 10 enemy soldiers lay motionless, and the ridge held its breath. But it wasn't over. It never is. She heard the vehicles before she saw them. Troop carriers, multiple squads, 27 soldiers advancing in disciplined formation, bypassing the main fight to strike from behind. If they reached the valley, her unit would be erased. She couldn't move her wounded teammate fast enough. She couldn't fight them head-on. But she could disappear. She stripped down to the essentials: rifle, ammunition, mirror, nothing else, dragged her teammate into concealment and marked the ground in her mind the way her father had taught her. Then she became the terrain. The first squad entered the choke point exactly as she predicted. She waited, let them compress, let confidence settle. Then she broke them. 3 shots, maximum confusion, formation shattered. She was already moving before the echoes faded. The second engagement came through smoke. She waited again, watched the wind, found the gap no one else noticed. 1 silhouette, 1 shot. Relocate. The third position was where everything came together. The crack in the mirror split the world into multiple angles, and she read all of them at once. Rhythm, pause, movement. She fired on the pauses. One by one they fell. Not because she was faster, but because she was patient. Panic did the rest. Men broke cover, made mistakes, trusted instincts that no longer applied. She let them move just far enough to expose others. Time stretched, breathing slowed. The mirror adjusted itself in her hands without conscious thought. When the last 4 broke and ran, she didn't need the mirror anymore. 4 shots. 4 seconds. Silence. When her unit arrived, they didn't understand what they were seeing. 27 bodies, 1 shooter, no clear angles. No explanation that fit doctrine. She sat apart, cleaning her rifle, the mirror beside her reflecting the sky. When asked how she did it, she didn't talk about kills. She talked about seeing. About understanding how fear bends people into predictable shapes. About using what others ignore. The inquiries came, the tests, the skepticism. She passed all of them. They tried to turn her into a symbol, a legend, a doctrine. She resisted that too. Because she knew the truth. It wasn't about the mirror. It never was. It was about patience, about humility, about paying attention when the world tells you not to. Months later, back in the field, she worked alongside soldiers she had trained. They moved quietly, observed without being seen. neutralized threats before they became battles. Lives saved without applause. One night, a young soldier watched her clean the mirror and asked if the stories were true. She smiled just a little. They laughed because they didn't understand what they were looking at, she said. She angled the mirror toward the darkness, watching the perimeter without exposing herself. Sometimes, she added softly, dignity doesn't argue. It simply acts. Why did she feel more exposed sitting among her own unit than she ever did lying alone in enemy territory? The laughter around the fire had a rhythm to it, loud voices, easy confidence, men who believed danger only existed somewhere ahead, never beside them. Lena sat slightly apart, close enough to hear everything, far enough to be forgotten. The mirror rested in her palm, cool despite the flames nearby. She rotated it slowly, watching the distorted reflections of boots, rifles, faces split by the crack in the glass. She wondered, not for the first time, when she had learned to be invisible without meaning to. Back home, invisibility had been a skill. On mountainsides, it kept you alive. In this place, among people who measured worth by volume and size, it felt like a quiet punishment. She listened as someone retold an old firefight story, embellishing details, soaking in admiration. Another voice cut in, louder, sharper. Morrison again. Always Morrison. Command, losing it, he said. Sending kids and paperweights to do recon now. A few chuckles followed. Someone glanced her way, then quickly looked away, as if meeting her eyes might invite discomfort. Lena focused on the mirror. The crack had spread a little more since the last mission. She traced it with her thumb, remembering how her father's hands had once been rougher than hers, how he'd held this same mirror up to a snow-bright ravine and told her to watch. "Don't look where everyone else looks," he'd said. "Look where no one thinks to." She'd been 8 years old, cold, afraid, trusting him completely. The memory settled her now. When Lieutenant Chen approached, her boots crunching softly on frozen gravel, Lena sensed it before she heard it. She always did. Chen crouched nearby, lowering her voice. "You good for tomorrow?" she asked. Lena nodded. "Yes, ma'am." Chen hesitated. Her eyes flicked to the mirror, then away. "You know they're worried, right?" "They always are. That ridge is bad terrain, exposed. If intelligence is wrong." "It is." Chen studied her, searching for arrogance maybe, finding none, only certainty. "You're sure?" "Yes." There was something about that word, spoken so calmly, that made people uneasy. Chen exhaled slowly. "Just be careful." Lena almost smiled. Instead, she slipped the mirror back into her pocket, the crack hidden but always present, like most things that mattered. Night fell heavy and fast. The cold crept in through layers, through muscle, into bone. Sleep came in fragments, dreams tangled with memory, her father's voice, her mother's hands buttoning her coat before school. The first time someone had laughed at her in uniform. She woke before dawn, heart steady, mind already moving. The ridge loomed darker than she expected, a jagged silhouette against a sky just beginning to gray. Patterson met her at the edge of camp, quiet, respectful. He didn't joke, didn't stare, just nodded. She appreciated that more than she could explain. They moved out without ceremony. No one wished them luck. No one made bets this time. Silence followed them into the trees, broken only by the sound of their own breath and the distant thunder of artillery. The climb was brutal. Every step threatened exposure. Lena chose her path instinctively, avoiding brittle branches, testing the ground before trusting it. She felt Patterson struggle behind her, felt his frustration, his effort. She adjusted her pace without comment. Hours passed, muscles burned, the cold gnawed. When they reached the observation point, the world seemed to open beneath them. The valley stretched out, scarred and smoking. Beyond it, the ridge they'd been sent to watch revealed its secret. Enemy movement, organized, purposeful. Lena's stomach tightened, not with fear but with confirmation. This was it. the thing she'd sensed but hadn't voiced. Patterson whispered, That's a lot." "Yes. We need to report." She reached for the radio just as voices drifted up behind them. Too close, too calm. Then the explosion tore the moment apart. Everything after that felt both frantic and slow. Shrapnel bit into the earth. Gunfire snapped overhead. Patterson went down hard, his shout cutting off into a gasp that made Lena's chest constrict. Training took over. She rolled, crawled, dragged him into cover, hands slick with his blood. She could hear the enemy advancing, methodical, confident. They thought they had caught scouts. They hadn't. Patterson's face was pale, eyes wide. "They're everywhere." "Not everywhere," Lena said quietly. She pulled out the mirror. The sound he made then wasn't laughter. It was disbelief edged with fear. "You can't be serious." She angled it toward the slope above them. Reflections bloomed across the cracked surface. Movement, boots, shadows that didn't know they were being watched. Her breathing slowed. For a moment doubt crept in. Not about the technique, about herself, about whether she could do this again, about whether all those hours, all that quiet practice would hold under this weight. She felt very small then, very human. But the memory of her father's voice cut through the doubt. Calm, patient, certain. "Corners," he'd said, "always corners." The first shot felt like an exhale. The enemy froze. Confusion rippled outward. She didn't rush. Rushing led to mistakes. She adjusted the mirror by millimeters, recalculated, fired again. A body dropped. Patterson stared at her, all replacing fear, but she didn't look back. There was no room for that now. Return fire erupted, chewing into the log beside them. Dirt sprayed her face. She didn't flinch. She shifted just enough, fired again. The machine gun fell silent. Silence, she knew, was temporary. She tracked the remaining movement through reflections, predicting paths, reading tension in posture. Humans under stress told their stories with their bodies. She had learned to listen. When it was over, Patterson let out a breath that sounded like a prayer. But Lena was already moving, already thinking ahead. The valley below roared with sustained combat. This had only been the beginning. They didn't get far before Patterson collapsed. Blood loss, shock. His weight felt heavier now, dragging against her muscles, against time. "Leave me," he gasped. She shook her head, no. But she knew the truth even as she said it. There was no way to carry him fast enough, no way to hide long enough. Then she heard the vehicles. Her heart sank, then steadied. 27. She counted them through binoculars, through reflections, through instinct. Enough to end everything. She crouched beside Patterson, brushed dirt from his face, checked his breathing. He was unconscious now, alive, for the moment. "I'll be back," she whispered, though she didn't know if it was a promise or a hope. She stripped down to essentials, every movement precise, left everything else behind, even her fear. As she melted into the terrain, becoming shadow and angle and silence, a strange calm settled over her. This was where she belonged, not at the fire, not in the jokes. Here, alone but not unseen. The first squad entered the choke point exactly as expected. She waited. Patience, she knew, was the difference between survival and legend. And she had never wanted to be a legend. She just wanted to do the job. By the time she fired, by the time the first 3 fell, the enemy had already lost something they would never recover. Certainty. And as confusion spread and panic followed, Lena felt something else rise beneath the cold focus. Not pride. Not anger. Resolve. Sometimes being ignored was the greatest advantage of all. How long can one person remain invisible before the silence itself becomes a weapon? Lena lay still, pressed into the cold earth, counting heartbeats that no longer felt like her own. The first shots had done what they were meant to do, not just kill but fracture certainty. She felt it ripple outward, even without seeing their faces directly. Confusion had weight, panic bent posture, fear shortened breaths. These things showed themselves in reflections long before they appeared in sound. She adjusted the mirror slightly, just enough to catch the slope beyond the choke point. The cracked glass split the world into uneven pieces, but her mind stitched them together without effort. She saw what they could not: how the terrain funneled movement, how instinct pushed men toward the same rocks, the same trees, the same shallow depressions they believed would protect them. She did not hate them. That surprised her sometimes. She had learned long ago that hatred was loud. It rushed decisions. It demanded speed when patience would do. What she felt now was quieter, colder, a responsibility that sat heavy in her chest, pressing her ribs inward with every breath. Below her, boots scrambled. Orders were shouted, overlapping, sharp with urgency. Someone fired wildly, bullets tearing into the wrong hillside. She waited. The mirror showed her the second squad advancing more cautiously now, formation tighter, weapons higher. They were learning. That mattered. She respected that. She respected them enough not to underestimate them. She relocated before they could triangulate her last position, sliding backward, then angling left through a stand of dead trees. Every movement was memorized from days of watching this terrain through optics, from imagining worst-case scenarios when others slept. She settled into a shallow depression behind two fallen logs, mud soaking into her uniform, cold biting deep. Her breathing slowed. She angled the mirror low this time, reflecting ground-level movement rather than ridgelines. Smoke bloomed ahead, disciplined, deliberate, smart. The mirror caught the distortion before her eyes did. Heat patterns shifting the smoke, thinning it unevenly. She waited, counting seconds, letting the wind do its work. There, a silhouette sharpened for half a breath. She fired. The return fire came immediately, angry and blind. Rounds snapped overhead, chewing bark and dirt, but none came close. They were firing at the idea of her, not the reality. She was already moving again. As she crawled, a thought surfaced, unbidden, unwelcome. How many times had she been told this kind of thinking didn't belong in real combat? That instincts like hers were unreliable, that if it wasn't taught, labeled, and standardized, it couldn't be trusted. She wondered if any of those instructors were alive right now, because of doctrine alone. The third position was one she'd marked mentally days ago, a shallow erosion ditch with a collapsed root system offering overhead cover. From here, the mirror's crack became an advantage. Each fragment reflected a different approach vector. To anyone else, it would have been chaos. To her, it was a map. The remaining squads merged, numbers swelling, confidence faltering. 15 now, safer together, slower, predictable. She felt a flicker of anxiety then. Not fear of death, fear of failure. If she misjudged even once, if she rushed a shot or delayed too long, they would find her, overwhelm her, reach the valley. People she knew would die. She closed her eyes for one heartbeat. In that darkness, she saw her mother's face, calm, steady. "You don't have to be loud to be strong," she'd said once, brushing Lena's hair before a school play no one had come to watch. Lena opened her eyes. Signal pause. She fired. A covering soldier dropped. The element continued, unaware of how exposed they were in those moments of stillness. Training told them the threat was frontal. Training had limits. Signal pause. Another shot. Confusion rippled. Voices rose, sharp and uncertain. The leader gestured, frustrated, trying to impose order. Lena shifted, relocating again before the echo faded. Her muscles burned now. Cold seeped into joints. Fatigue tugged at the edges of her focus. She acknowledged it, then set it aside. There would be time later, or there wouldn't. The enemy made a decision then, the wrong one. They charged toward where they thought the shots were coming from. They ran past her position, flanks exposed, breath ragged, fear overriding discipline. She fired 5 times. 5 bodies fell. The forest swallowed the sound. She moved again, deeper now, letting the terrain close behind her. The mirror came up, angled, adjusted, trusted. She barely thought about it anymore. Her hands knew what to do. Her mind followed. Time stretched and compressed in strange ways. Seconds felt long enough to think entire thoughts. Minutes vanished without memory. She tracked, fired, relocated, repeated. Each cycle shaved away another piece of the force hunting her. 12 left. One broke cover, panic written into every step. She let him run, let him draw others out of hiding. When he fell, 2 more followed him into exposure. She didn't feel triumph. She felt relief. 11:10. Her shoulders ached, fingers numbed. She forced them to stay loose. Tension killed accuracy. The officer revealed himself next, rising to signal retreat. Through the mirror, Lena saw it before it happened, the way his weight shifted, the breath he took before standing. She fired before he fully straightened. 9. Leaderless now, directionless, dangerous in their desperation. She picked the radio operator next, not out of cruelty but necessity. Communication was a weapon. Remove it and chaos did the rest. The antenna dropped. The man followed. 8. Her breathing trembled then, just slightly. The weight of what she was doing pressed in. Not guilt, something heavier. The knowledge that every decision here echoed outward, shaping lives she would never see. She reminded herself why she was here. Protection, not destruction. The last group made their move together, bunching up, charging downhill toward the valley. A gamble, speed over stealth, momentum over caution. She had predicted it. She was already in position, prone, rifle steady, no mirror needed now. The fundamentals took over, the kind drilled so deeply they lived in bone and muscle rather than thought. 4 shots. 4 seconds. Silence returned, thick and absolute. Lena stayed still for a long moment after, listening, watching reflections for movement that didn't come. Her heart pounded now, loud in her ears, impossible to ignore. 27. She hadn't counted during the fight. Counting made things too real. But now the number settled in, heavy and undeniable. She closed her eyes. For the first time since it began, emotion surged, not pride, not horror, but a deep, bone-weary sadness. For what had been lost, for what had been prevented, for the strange space she occupied between those two truths. When footsteps approached later, cautious, professional, she didn't reach for her rifle. She sat up slowly, mud-covered, mirror beside her reflecting the pale sky. Exhaustion etched into her face deeper than any scar. They would ask questions soon. They would doubt. They would dissect every angle and decision. She didn't prepare answers. Some things, she knew, could only be understood by those willing to look differently. And most people never did. What happens after the shooting stops, when the silence finally has time to ask questions? Lena stayed seated on the rock as the response team spread out, boots crunching carefully, rifles raised, eyes scanning for threats that no longer existed. She could feel their confusion before anyone spoke. The terrain told a story they didn't know how to read. Bodies scattered across too wide an area. Entry wounds that didn't line up with obvious firing positions. No clear line of advance. No sense to it, not by the rules they knew. Someone swore under his breath. She didn't look at them. She focused on cleaning her rifle, methodical, grounding herself in the familiar ritual. Mud smeared the metal. Her hands trembled slightly now that the danger had passed. She let them. Control didn't mean denial. It meant acknowledgement. Lieutenant Chen approached first, slower than necessary, as if sudden movement might shatter something fragile. "Ward," she said softly. Lena looked up. Chen's eyes searched her face, not for bravado, not for triumph, but for cracks. What she found instead was exhaustion so deep it bordered on emptiness. "Did you do all this?" Chen asked. "Yes, ma'am." No explanation, no qualifiers. Behind Chen, Sergeant Reynolds moved among the fallen, counting, crouching, standing again. Each time he straightened, his expression grew more unsettled. He had seen chaos before. He had seen ambushes, massacres, miracles. This was something else. "This doesn't track," he muttered. "Angles are wrong, distances don't make sense." "Unless they never saw her," someone said quietly. The words hung there. Reynolds turned. "What?" Lena stood then, legs stiff, joints screaming. She picked up the mirror and walked a few steps into the terrain, stopping near a boulder. Without speaking, she angled the glass just right. In the reflection, the space behind the boulder came into perfect view. Reynolds stared. Then he crouched, shifted his position, followed the reflection back to its source. Understanding dawned slowly, reluctantly. "Indirect," he breathed. "Yes," Lena said. Chen's radio crackled, command demanding updates. She answered automatically, voice steady despite the disbelief tightening her chest. "All hostiles neutralized. Minimal friendly casualties. Single shooter." The pause on the other end was long enough to feel. "Say again." "Confirmed." They took Lena back to base at dusk. The ride was quiet. No one joked. No one asked questions. She sat alone again, mirror resting in her lap, watching the landscape slide by in fractured reflections. At the medical tent they checked her vitals. Dehydration, mild hypothermia, bruises she hadn't noticed yet. No one commented on the blood that wasn't hers. The debrief came later, in a repurposed storage container with harsh lighting and folding chairs. Captain Hughes sat across from her, tablet glowing with reports, diagrams, still images from helmet cams. "Walk me through it," he said, not unkindly, "because what you're describing sounds impossible." Lena placed the mirror on the table between them. Under the light it looked smaller, more broken, less impressive than ever. "It's geometry," she said, "and patience." Hughes rubbed his face. "You killed 27 soldiers." "I stopped 27 threats," she corrected quietly. The distinction mattered to her. He studied her, then the mirror. "Why wasn't this in your training record?" "It was," she said, "just not approved." She told him about her father, about learning to read terrain before she could read books, about instructors who dismissed the technique as unreliable, impractical, unsafe. "Everyone wants technology," she said. "Optics, drones, something expensive enough to trust." "And a mirror is." "No, sir." Silence settled between them, heavy but not hostile. "Command going to want replication," Hughes said finally. "Testing, evaluation." "I understand." He hesitated. "Do you want this?" Lena thought about the fire, the laughter, the way being unseen had become her armor. "I want the mission to succeed," she said, "however that looks." The inquiry began 3 days later. A panel, senior officers, clean uniforms far removed from mud and smoke. They watched footage, reviewed maps, questioned assumptions. Skepticism was the default. Colonel Donovan spoke last. "If this technique is legitimate," she said, "it should be repeatable." They set up a range, targets behind cover, no direct lines of sight, 10 minutes allotted. Lena didn't need 10. She moved calmly, deliberately as she always had, angled the mirror, calculated without visible effort, fired. Target down. Again. Again. When the last target fell, the range was silent. One of the instructors shook his head. "That shouldn't be possible." "Most things aren't," Lena said, "until someone does them." They examined the mirror, its cracks, its imperfections. Donovan held it up, thoughtful. "It's not just the tool," she said slowly. "It's you." Lena nodded. "Consistency matters. I know this mirror. Every distortion. Switching tools would mean starting over. The panel conferred. Words like doctrine and paradigm floated through the air. Lena listened without reacting. She had learned long ago not to anchor herself to outcomes she couldn't control. When they finished, Donovan faced her. Effective immediately, you're being reassigned. Lena's stomach tightened. Advanced tactics development, Donovan continued. Training division. Field removal. She kept her face neutral. Ma'am, I prefer deployment. I know, Donovan said, but what you've demonstrated can save lives at scale. Keeping it with one operator would be negligent. The word stung. Lena nodded once. Yes, ma'am. Later, alone in her quarters, she sat on her bunk, mirror in hand, staring at her own fractured reflection. For the first time since the ridge, doubt surfaced sharp and clear. Had she just lost the only place she truly fit? She thought about Patterson, recovering in the medical ward, about the valley that still stood because she had been there, about the soldiers who would never know how close they'd come to dying. She exhaled slowly. Maybe this was just another corner she hadn't learned to look around yet. She wiped the mirror clean, careful as always. Tomorrow, she would stand in front of soldiers who might laugh the same way others had. Tomorrow, she would be invisible again. But invisibility, she had learned, was not weakness. It was preparation. What does it cost to be believed only after you've proven yourself impossible to ignore? The first classroom was too clean, too bright. White walls, polished floors, chairs arranged in careful rows like certainty could be manufactured by symmetry. Lena stood at the front, hands folded behind her back, feeling the familiar prickle of being assessed before a single word was spoken. 12 soldiers sat facing her, all experienced, all confident, a few openly skeptical. One didn't bother to hide his smirk. She recognized the look. She had seen it her entire career. Mirrors were mounted on the far wall for range safety demonstrations. The irony wasn't lost on her. She began without introduction. You've all been selected because you're adaptable, she said. Her voice was calm, unadorned. If you weren't, you wouldn't be here. One of them shifted. Another leaned back, arms crossed. She placed the mirror on the table. It looked even smaller in this space. Ordinary, almost laughable. A hand went up. With respect, Sergeant, a man said, tone polite but dismissive. This feels like a workaround for bad positioning. Real combat doesn't allow for tricks. Lena nodded slowly. You're right, real combat doesn't allow for comfort either. A few quiet chuckles. She ignored them. Optics fail, she continued. Batteries die, signals jam, weather interferes. When that happens, most soldiers lose vision before they lose firepower. She paused, let that settle. This, she said, touching the mirror, doesn't care about any of that. They moved to the range after. Targets hidden behind simulated urban cover. No direct lines of sight. The setup was intentionally frustrating. She watched their reactions as they tried to solve the problem the way they always had. Scopes adjusted, angles calculated, frustration grew. You can't hit what you can't see, someone muttered. Lena picked up the mirror, then change how you see. The first attempts were ugly, shots wide, movements awkward. The brain resisted the reversal instinctively. One soldier slammed the mirror down in irritation. Another laughed it off, embarrassed. She didn't rush them. She remembered her own first failures. The headaches, the disorientation, the hours of practice that felt pointless until they suddenly weren't. Your brain hates uncertainty, she said quietly. It wants the world to behave the way it expects. This forces it to adapt. By the end of the day, no one had mastered it. That was expected. By the end of the week, a few had begun to understand. One of them, Hammond, was the loudest skeptic, broad-shouldered, decorated, accustomed to being right. When he finally made his first successful reflected shot, his reaction wasn't celebration. It was silence. He stared at the target, then at the mirror, as if seeing both for the first time. "It shouldn't work," he said. "But it does," Lena replied. Training days blurred together. Frustration, breakthroughs, setbacks, small victories no one applauded. She watched some students adapt quickly, their minds bending around the concept with surprising ease. Others struggled, fighting the technique as if it were an insult. Not everyone succeeded. She didn't take that personally. Adaptation, she knew, was not a moral virtue. It was a biological one. At night, alone in her quarters, the quiet returned, the kind that pressed in once the structure of the day fell away. She cleaned the mirror the same way she always had, careful, deliberate. The cracks seemed deeper now under artificial light. She wondered briefly what would happen if it shattered completely. Would the technique survive without it? Or was it never about the object at all? Reports filtered in from the field. Units using mirror-based observation to clear corners without exposure. Recon teams identifying threats without triggering engagements. Small notes in after-action reports that didn't make headlines but changed outcomes. Lives saved quietly. That mattered more to her than recognition. Still, something inside her remained restless. When Colonel Donovan visited months later, Lena sensed the shift before the words were spoken. Command satisfaction carried a different energy, heavier, more expectant. "Your students are performing exceptionally," Donovan said, watching a group practice on the range. "This is becoming doctrine." Lena nodded. "They're doing the work." "They're doing your work." Donovan handed her a folder. Inside were deployment options, hybrid assignments, return to contested regions. Lena didn't pretend to consider. "I accept." Back in the field, the cold felt familiar. Honest. She lay prone beside two of her former students, mirrors angled, reflections overlapping. An observation network built on trust rather than technology. Enemy patrols passed, without ever knowing they were being watched. Information flowed upward, coordinates adjusted, threats neutralized without contact. Clean, efficient, invisible. Later, back at base, a young soldier approached her hesitantly. "Is it true," he asked, "about the ridge?" She didn't answer right away. She finished cleaning the mirror, catching the firelight just right. "It's documented," she said finally. "They say you're different." She smiled faintly. "Everyone is, most just hide it better." He nodded, thoughtful, then walked away. Lena turned the mirror toward the perimeter, old habits anchoring her in the present. In its reflection, the camp unfolded, guards, shadows, movement. Somewhere beyond that darkness, enemies planned, counted, trusted their numbers and their tools. She understood now what her father had meant all those years ago. Strength didn't announce itself. It waited. And when it moved, it didn't ask permission. What remains when the mission ends? The echoes fade, and no one is watching anymore. The night after the operation was quieter than Lena expected. Not peaceful quiet in the way a held breath feels quiet, as if the world itself was waiting to see what she would do next. The camp lights hummed softly. Generators pulsed in the distance. Somewhere, laughter broke out and died just as quickly. She sat on the edge of her bunk, mirror in hand, turning it slowly. Her reflection fractured into familiar pieces. An eye here, a scarred cheek there, someone strong, someone tired, someone still unsure where she belonged. She thought about the ridge again, not the fighting, but the moment just before it. The weight of choice. The knowledge that once she acted, there would be no version of her untouched by what followed. People like to imagine combat as a single defining act, one moment that made sense of everything before and after. She knew better. It was a chain. One decision pulling the next into existence, each one leaving a mark you didn't always feel right away. She lay back and closed her eyes. Sleep came eventually, but it wasn't kind. She dreamed of mirrors lining a narrow hallway, each reflecting a different version of her. A child crouched beside her father in the snow, a recruit standing alone while others laughed, a soldier pressed into frozen mud, counting breaths that weren't hers. In every reflection, her eyes were the same, alert, searching, waiting. She woke before dawn, heart racing, hands clenched. Outside, frost coated the ground again. Another day beginning, another cycle. The debriefs continued for weeks, questions repeated, scenarios replayed. Analysts tried to isolate the variable that made what she did possible. They wanted diagrams, flowcharts, something clean enough to teach without uncertainty. She gave them what she could, but some things resisted translation. This isn't just about reflection, she told one group of instructors. It's about restraint, about not reacting when instinct tells you to move. They nodded, took notes. She wasn't sure they understood. Restraint was not something that showed well on slides. Her hybrid assignment pulled her back into the field months later. Different terrain, different enemies, same principles. This time she wasn't alone. Her students moved with her, mirrors angled, eyes trained to see what wasn't obvious. She watched them closely, not as a commander, but as a guardian of something fragile. A way of thinking that could easily be dismissed if it failed once. It didn't. The mission ended without shots fired, intelligence gathered, threats neutralized by absence rather than force. Back at base, her students celebrated quietly. Pride flickered across their faces, tempered by understanding. They knew what they had avoided. Lena felt it too, a deep, steady satisfaction that didn't need witnesses. One evening, as the sun dipped low and cast long shadows across the perimeter, she found herself standing watch alone. The mirror caught the fading light, turning the camp into a mosaic of motion and stillness. She thought about how often she'd been overlooked, how often silence had been mistaken for weakness, how many times she'd learned to endure rather than confront. She realized then that invisibility had never been something done to her. It had been something she chose. Chosen because it allowed her to see clearly, to move deliberately, to act without ego. The world valued noise. She had learned to value signal. A message came in later that night. Patterson had been cleared for return home. He left her a note, awkward, sincere, handwritten. "You saved my life. I didn't understand what you were doing then. I do now. Thank you for staying." She read it twice, then folded it carefully and tucked it into her pack beside the mirror. Not trophies, anchors. On her last deployment of the year, she trained a new unit, younger, faster, raised on technology. Some adapted, some didn't. She never forced it. "This isn't for everyone," she told them, "and that's okay." One soldier stayed after class, hesitant. A woman, quiet, watching from the edges the same way Lena once had. "They don't listen to me," she said, not accusing, just stating fact. Lena studied her reflection in the mirror, then angled it so the young soldier could see herself too, fragmented, incomplete, real. "Good," Lena said. "That gives you time to learn." Years passed. Her reputation followed her, but it never defined her. She turned down interviews, declined commendations that felt too performative. She preferred to work, to teach, to disappear again when the job was done. The mirror aged with her. More scratches, deeper cracks, still reliable. On one cold morning, much like the one where everything had changed, she stood at a briefing table again. Younger soldiers around her. Same tension, same uncertainty. Someone laughed at something small and unfamiliar in her hand. She didn't correct them. She never did. When the mission began, when uncertainty closed in and choices narrowed, she moved as she always had, carefully, deliberately, seeing around corners others didn't know existed. And when it was over, when lives were saved without spectacle, no one argued anymore. They didn't need to. Later, alone again, she cleaned the mirror beneath a dim light, hands steady, breath slow. In its reflection, she saw not just herself, but every version she had been. The girl who learned to watch. The soldier who learned to wait. The woman who learned that dignity didn't demand recognition. She set the mirror down, catching the light just right. Somewhere unseen, the world kept moving. And so did she. Because sometimes, the strongest presence is the one that doesn't announce itself. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts.